South Asia's second largest economy, Bangladesh, is passing through a revolutionary period. About 3 months ago, Bangladesh's longest-running autocrat, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, fled the country as a result of a mass uprising led by the country's students. More than 1,600 students and protesters were killed, and thousands of others were injured during those clashes between Sheikh Hasina's men and the ordinary protesters. Now that Sheikh Hasina is gone and her autocratic regime completely collapsed, Bangladeshi politicians, thinkers, activists are engaged in a process what they are now calling the birth of a second republic, Bangladesh 2.0. One of the most talked about topics of that second republic campaign is the possibility of a newly written constitution for Bangladesh. The interim government led by Professor Muhammad Yunus initiated a constitutional reform committee with the mandate to release reform proposals by December 2024. Today we have a special guest with us, Barrister Asaduzzaman Fuaad, who is the Joint Member Secretary of Bangladesh AB Party, which stands for Amar Bangladesh Party or My Bangladesh Party. Fuaad is an outspoken and eloquent critique of Bangladesh's current constitution. Fuad's main proposition is that Bangladesh's constitution does not need simple amendments. Fuaad thinks the constitution must be completely tossed out and it should be replaced with a newer, simpler, shorter constitution written using simpler texts. Welcome to the show, Fuaad.
Thank you, Shafkat.
All right, so enough with the introduction. Let's go deep into the topic. Why do you think the current constitution of Bangladesh, which is in place for the last 53 years, needs to be completely tossed aside and replaced with a new one?
The first reason is, following the Liberation War, the constitution was adopted in 1972 without any public consultation whatsoever. And the assembly that had the jurisdiction to pass it was elected in 1970 under the Pakistan Framework Ordinance. So therefore, we believe that that hasn't reflected the very aspiration of our people. Everything the last deposed dynasty, the Sheikh family, had done using this constitution, whatever loot and plunder had done, whatever the faulty and defective elections were undertaken during the last 16 years, were all done using this simple book. So this book became obsolete in terms of providing the national aspiration. The book became so thick and ununderstandable for the people on a street level. Just think of the book as like a procedural laws, like how the president or the prime minister of the parliament or the chief justice should be appointed or elected. Now, these should have simply had a separate act of parliament rather having everything in the single book. We have a large, thick fundamental rights section. We can simply have a few lines to say that whatever the treaties we have signed in terms of civil and political rights and international organization and so forth, we shall respect them. And in the beginning of the nationality and the language and the territory, these are simply a non-starter for the constitution. So what I propose, that a constitution should have a simple aspiration of a nation, but why we exist as a nation, why we are not Indians, and why we are not Burmese, despite being in the neighborhood, despite having a lot of similarities of cultures and history, why we are not them, why we are we. So that we, the people, should be defined through a separate social contract. And that instrument is somehow missing from that historic documentations. Also, because of the Second Republic we have now espoused, that the Muslim Revolution took place in July and August, that aspiration should be added to it. As soon as we say that we need a Second Republic, we by default say that the old instrument of the First Republic should come to an end, because a new republic cannot be run by an old instrument.
The other day, you made the argument that replacing the constitution is an easier undertaking rather than amending the constitution from some technical standpoint. What are those technicalities that make it easier to replace the whole document as opposed to just amending it to reflect the things that you are talking about?
Let's say, for example, the four principles that is to be used as the governing tools of this state. Now, Party X has a separate four principles of governance than Party Y. Now, how we reconcile governing principles every time a new political party comes to power? If we just go back to our original proclamation of independence, where three principles are proclaimed for governance: equality, human dignity, and social justice. I believe that those three are good enough for the secular or for the liberals, for the atheists, for the rightists, religious bloc, communist, leftist, everybody, because these are the common values that everybody would agree upon. If you go by sections and sections, you will find every of different political parties to be considered. Therefore, things will be so complicated to come to a consensus after a thorough dialogue and conversation. Rather, if we have go to a simple instrument of declaration and we just propose the structures of the state and then leave it to the next parliament to decide and debate every section and the laws and enactments that needs to be put forward for the future republic.
So the idea here is then create a very simple document now and then leave it up to the future parliament to add more amendments to it or more provisions to it? Is that the idea that you are proposing?
It's like the American Constitution. You see, the American Constitution is originally 5, 6, or 7 pages, but there are more amendments to it. 27 or 28 amendments, if I remember correctly. So if necessary, the government in the future can make as many amendments to address and suit the time and the need of the nation. So, but the instrument itself should be like the Magna Carta documents, the Bill of Rights, or the rights of the man in the French Revolution. So where every part of the society can look into the document and say, well, this is what my book looks like. This is why I'm reflected into. This is my mirror.
I get that part, but what I'm asking is this. So we make a constitution which is simpler, shorter, and fairer, easy to read, small, and abridged. But then, do you want continuation of amendments on it after new government comes, or do you want procedural stuff to be written outside of the constitution?
Both. I want both, because most of the constitutional provisions to be taken out of the constitution and then to be put under statutes of the Act of the Parliament after different chapters. Now, that of course is to be debated in the Parliament, how the president should be elected, whether we will go for the presidential model of governance or the presidential form of mixed governance with the Parliament, like we have in the French Republic, or we go for the Westminster model of the governance. So what form of governance we go for, that's a different debate for an all newly elected Parliament and the political party needs to take place. Amendment is part of Constitution. It can happen anytime in the future Parliament.
Okay. What you are essentially demanding is basically the mother of all political undertakings.
Yes.
Do you truly believe that the current interim government has the necessary political cohesion, the mandate, the acumen for carrying out such a grand task of creating a new constitution? Or are they just going to make some proposals and then leave it to the political parties for implementing those proposals in the future? In that case, how do you know that the next political party, whoever that is not going to ruin it, not going to just destroy all the good work and efforts that you are spending right now?
From our experience of political governance, what we have found out, and pretty much a consensus, that they seldom undertake any amendments or reforms. Now, with regard to the current administration, this is the interim administration in our history with so much legitimacy from the streets, from the people across the board, and the political parties. So never in our 53 years of history, a government came to administration with so much popularity. Now, the critical challenge for this government, they don't have any political party, they don't have any party cadres across the country to talk on their behalf. So I believe if they're firm, yes, they can do that. They can do it with consultation with the political party and the other stakeholders. And I do not believe that it can be left safely to the future governments.
You are a barrister and a man of law. So from the legal standpoint, what are the most prudent steps that you would recommend to your client, if they were the government, that can actually lead to the birth of a new constitution? So let me help you out with the answer. What I just heard is that first there needs to be a proposal from this Constitution Reform Committee. Then that proposal would probably go to the political stakeholders for consultation. And that consultation will probably create a final draft. And then what? Then an election or a referendum on that constitution? Is that what you're saying at that point?
Well, I think consensus building is the most critical aspect, even more critical than drafting the new constitution. That's what I understand. And there are a number of things can happen depending on how the political parties and the stakeholders, the student communities, civil society members give their opinion to it. What I would prefer to happen, that once a draft is consulted with the political parties and stakeholders, then it should go to referendum under this administration. Second option could be an open written charter that all the political parties to be participating in the future elections, to be forming government, either alone or in a coalition or a national unity government, whatever form they are in, they should sign the charter, conferring their agreement that as soon as they come to power, they shall hold the referendum and pass it as a new instrument, the social contract of the Second Republic. Third is about, it could be mixed, that part of the constitution which are more agreeable to everybody, that can be passed through referendum, and the part can be left to the next parliament. Or fourth option that I like to see is this could be made part of the Electoral Commission law and reforms. Because if the political parties, upon coming to power in next government, if they fail to abide by this referendum election, they should be held accountable under electoral law. So in some form or other, that political party should be held accountable, because we have seen the similar kind of reforms being proposed and undertaken during 2006 and 7, 111 administration. And we have seen bitterly that the new regime came to power, simply forgot that there was at all a discussion of reforms. So we do not like to see that kind of things happen in the future.
So there are a number of steps that you can recommend or that you can predict at this point that can actually materialize. I would like to add one more to your proposal. That's something we see in the US. When there are changes to a state constitution or a city constitution or a city law, they attach those provisions on the ballot when we go for election for a president or a senator or whatever. So you can actually up and down a proposition when you are doing the regular general election. So that is another way you can probably pass some of the major reforms during the same electoral process where people are going to elect their next parliament. All right, so now that we're talking about consensus building and political participation of people, I have the largest elephant in the room in terms of political consensus, and that is the presence of Awami League. Awami League still happens to be a large political party. Of course, all its leaders are absconding from the country, including the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who fled Bangladesh, and she's living in another country right now. Almost all the ranks and files of that party have fled, but that does not mean the party is completely without supporters. They do have a lot of supporters still in the country who are normal people, normal citizens of Bangladesh. So the consensus building mechanism that you are talking about, should that have any room for those people so that they can at least show up and voice their support or refusal of whatever change that you guys are going to propose?
It's quite a challenging issue to deal with, but these are hard facts. And as a nation, we need to look forward in terms of the future electoral possibility. in terms of the penal offenses that had been committed over the years, how that should be addressed, in terms of their offenses to deprive the nation of democracy and votes and so forth. So these are the issues that needs to be sorted out first before a lot of questions can be answered. Any commission that is having consultations can seek papers or submissions from citizens. And I would certainly feel that the people belong to that camp, Awami Jatiya Party and those camps, can submit their oppositions to the commission because they're citizens, they do live in this country, they have every right to be represented during the discussion, and they should be allowed to have their opinions heard before the commissions. And the commission would then have a wider perspectives before recommendations.
All right, so that's a good idea. And in fact, if any of these amendments are part of the ballot for the election, they are voters. They can go and not vote for it or vote against it. So implicitly, they will have their participation taken into account if you go through a referendum or an electoral process to begin with.
Just for your viewers, every commission has already a functioning website and email. They already asked the nation, anybody willing to give any suggestions, recommendations, advices, amendments, anything, they can write it down to that particular email and submit online as well. So this is an open platform. So commissions are open to receive anybody's consultation.
Got it. So how is that process going? Do you know whether people are actually taking part, sending emails and proposals?
Oh, yes. I was told by the members of the commission thousands of emails and with recommendations, and brilliant recommendations are coming forth. So yes, this is functional and really getting the nation connected.
All right. So now just to play devil's advocate, let me give you some examples of recent attempts to change constitution around the world and how messy those processes were. Let's start with Thailand. Thailand, after a military coup back in 2014, wanted to get a new constitution, which many alleged favored the country's military rulers. The military claimed the new constitution was supposed to stabilize Thailand's economy, but in the end, what had happened there was that this whole attempt for a new constitution led to years of chaos and protests in Thailand. Turkish President Erdogan, back in 2017, succeeded in changing the country's constitution and changed country's governance system to a presidential system of governance from a parliamentarian one. This helped Erdogan consolidate his own political power. There was a referendum back in 2017. The referendum passed by a very narrow margin, which led to widespread protests and international criticism against Erdogan. That constitutional reform left Turkey deeply polarized and weakened the country's democracy, according to many observers. Chile, the South American country, still trying to adopt a new constitution starting from 2019. Chileans are still trying to rewrite their constitution, which was enacted during the time of dictator Pinochet, which is a very similar situation as you guys are in right now in Bangladesh due to Hasina. The voters in Chile rejected the initial draft in 2022. The country is still sorting through that constitutional mess, which left Chile deeply polarized between the country's political left and the political right. Sri Lanka, Bangladesh's South Asian neighbor, made changes to its constitution in both 2015 and 2020. In 2015, the amendments sought to reduce presidential power and restore democratic norms. But all of those changes that the Sri Lankans made back in 2015 were reversed in 2020 again with another amendment. And that moved the people to the streets again. There were more protests, chaos, and economic crisis in Sri Lanka. So what we see here is that major constitutional reforms and obviously a total rewriting of the constitution is a dangerous affair. How much confidence do you have that Bangladesh will succeed in enacting a fairer, simpler, shorter constitution like you were talking about in the end without having major political and economic crisis? And what is the basis of your confidence?
I think it all depends on how the interim administration is doing in terms of addressing the regular issues of the country, like price hike, inflation, public transport crisis, or in the healthcare system, traffic, and law enforcement issues across the country. If the nation receives relatively minimum services from those aspects from the administration, they would rally behind the administration. I'm suggesting for a smaller constitution because it would be more agreeable than getting into a thick one and amendments. Because the thick constitution amendments has to go para by para, chapter by chapter, and that it would create huge amounts of counter propositions, counter recommendations, and so forth. And then it's going to be messy for the nation to agree upon. So therefore, yes, it can be done. There are challenges. The status quo is always a status quo. Reform always attracts resistance. That's how the nation works and progress. And it is the job of the leadership, statesmanship, and the administration's performance to deliver that.
All right, Barrister Fuaad, it was a pleasure talking to you. I sincerely hope you guys succeed in creating a modern and effective constitution for Bangladesh that prevents the reemergence of tyranny and fascism in the country. Hope to talk to you again when further progress is made on the constitutional reform front over the next few months. Thank you for your time and thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for inviting me.